Welcome to the Reading for Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Professor Pozzulo. Today I'm talking with Dr. Fancourt, author of Art Cure, The Science of How the Arts Saves Lives. Welcome, Dr. Fancourt. Great to talk with you today. Before we start talking about Art Cure, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the arts and the impact on health and well-being?
It's so lovely to be with you. Thank you. I'm a professor of psychobiology and epidemiology at University College London. So I'm a scientist and I spend my days researching how the arts affect our health. I actually entered this, though, initially from the arts side of things. I come from a family of professional musicians and I thought I was going to head down that route. And in fact, I started to. I was working as a professional pianist, but I always had this inner passion for science. And I was lucky enough to be working in hospitals and seeing firsthand the incredible effects that the arts were having on people's health. But as a result, it made me actually want to train in science in order to be able to research and understand these benefits more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am so glad that you trained in science, wrote this book, because it is essential reading for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. So I absolutely loved this book. Can we maybe start by talking about what are the arts? Can you give us some examples of what the arts are?
So arts engagement are creative practices that often focus on emotional expression or beauty or imagination. Often we think about them as performing arts, visual arts, crafts, literary arts, or going to cultural events. But I also in the book talk about some of those fringe things like culinary arts, like baking, and horticultural arts, like growing and arranging flowers, which actually contain a lot of the same ingredients. So I think we can talk about arts in that encompassing way, whilst also appreciating that certain art forms are particularly effective for certain health outcomes.
Fascinating. So I was going to ask you, are there certain types of art or art forms that are more impactful than others? And what would you recommend if someone is sort of new to this? Where should they start?
The truth is, it really depends what kind of health outcome we're talking about. If we're looking at things like general well-being or general mental health, there's actually evidence that all kinds of arts engagements can support those kinds of outcomes. But let's say you want to think about what kinds of art might be able to help somebody who's had a stroke or had Parkinson's with their movement, for example. Well, then you're going to need an art form that has the sort of rhythm and tempo element to it. So music and dance are particularly effective for that. And then there are other things we can think about, like getting the arts to help us rethink major life decisions and health decisions and change our behaviors. And often narrative art forms like stories, like plays, theatre, films, those are particularly effective for those kinds of outcomes.
Fascinating. I was really struck by music and the power of music, actually. And it seemed almost like it's a cure-all for many things. Can you talk a little bit about maybe music specifically and the impacts it has on people?
Music's a really interesting art form because it's got that rhythm element and it's also got that narrative element as well when we listen. And one of the things that happens when we listen to music is it activates reward centers in our brain. So this involves increased availability of neurotransmitters like dopamine that help us to feel happy. And actually with music, it's not just the kind of peak moments in music, like those big choruses and songs, that helps us to feel happy, but it's also anticipation of those moments, which is where that temporal, that narrative elements of music is really important. But of course, some music isn't happy, it's sad as well. And actually sad music can be really good at helping us to regulate our emotions, or it can be cathartic and helping us to vent negative emotions that we might be experiencing. And if we listen to energizing music, then that beat, that tempo is something that can help us when we're exercising. If we're running, for example, we'll run faster when we're listening to music. We won't feel pain as much because music helps to release opioids in the brain, which are a natural painkiller. And also the rhythm of music can help us synchronize our movements. So in fact, we'll even lift weights in the gym for longer if we're listening to music. But at the same time, relaxing music can also have benefits in terms of reducing stress hormones like cortisol, lowering our blood pressure and heart rate, even helping to reduce levels of inflammation in our immune system.
Yeah, I found that actually that piece of research in your book really interesting, that we can actually change what's happening in our bodies by various art forms. Can you talk a little bit more about that and that connection?
This is actually the area that I do a lot of research in, is the biological impact of the arts. And I think it's one of the most exciting ones, in my biased opinion. But because many people will sort of say instinctively that the arts help them to feel happier or increase their well-being. But I think people are sometimes less aware that there are these deeper-seated physiological effects happening. And some of the research that I think is really exciting coming out is looking at how arts engagement is even related to our rate of biological aging. So neuroscientists have looked at our brains and found that when we engage in arts, it affects so many different regions of our brains. It's really a whole brain workout. And it even helps to increase the connectivity between regions of the brain that are vulnerable to aging. So people who are regularly engaged as amateurs or professionals in the arts actually have brains that stay younger for longer. But also we see this even at the level of our DNA expression, our gene expression. We find that when people are regularly engaged in the arts, they actually have particular patterns of gene expression that indicate that they are biologically younger. They're known as epigenetic clocks. And we've known that this effect happens with other health behaviors. Like if you exercise regularly, for example, you tend to have younger epigenetic clocks, healthy diet. But what's really exciting is seeing we actually see the similar kinds of things for the arts as well, actually with quite similar effect sizes too.
This is absolutely fascinating and so powerful, I think. Especially because the arts are really easy. I mean, listening to music, that doesn't take a lot. Do you have any recommendations for people who say, I've never been very, very much into the arts or very creative? Do you have any thoughts on how we can get started, how people can get started? Because the impacts are so powerful.
I think this is such a key question, and it's something I come to in the closing chapters of the book in detail, because you have to understand what your blocks are. Now, for some people, they might just feel like they're not artistic or creative. People often say that, but actually it's really not true. We are all inherently artistic and creative as humans. So actually, then it's about working out, why are you thinking that? What are the blocks? And in the chapters, I give people kind of questionnaires they can go through so they can discover what their particular blocks are. And then I show how we can use behavioral science to unblock those blocks. So if it's more of a psychological feeling like you're not talented, you don't know how to do it, then actually there are things like taster classes, YouTube videos, being able to learn some of the basic skills in an art form that could really help you. Whereas if it's actually much more about you perhaps just thinking that you haven't found something you actually enjoy, therefore you don't think you're going to like it, well, then it's actually probably about trying a whole range of things and being able to actually find something that you sample that you suddenly really feel that connection to. I heard of someone recently who was doing a new creative activity every week for this year as their New Year's resolution, just to see which one actually really stood out to them. And I think simple things like that can be so effective.
That's incredible. And really, I think it shows there's such diversity. And so if you do try something and maybe you don't enjoy it or don't like it, there's other options, and people shouldn't sort of stop just because maybe they tried a class or a particular type of activity that wasn't for them. What surprises you about this research?
The thing that surprises me the most is that we have such low levels of arts engagement, even though it's so good for us, and we really don't seem to value the arts enough in that way. We recently did research in the US, and we looked at a representative sample of adults, and we said, did you do any arts yesterday? It had to be the main thing they were doing, so you couldn't include people just playing music in the background. You had to be actively listening or doing it yourself or going to an event. Only 1 in 20 said they'd done anything yesterday. And if we compare this to other health behaviors, 57% of adults in high-income countries will say that they ate fruit and vegetables, and 40% will say they got their recommended physical activity. So I really don't believe the arts are any less enjoyable, but rather I think it's that in our brains, we've sort of badged them as this luxury that you should only do if you've got enough time and you need to prioritize other things in your life. And it just feels like completely topsy-turvy way of thinking about it. The arts have so many benefits and they're so enjoyable. Surely we should all be prioritizing them every day.
I completely agree with you. And it's one of the reasons why I think your book is so powerful is because it's pretty easy, I think, to incorporate some artistic activity into your life pretty much every day. And it doesn't have to be, necessarily the whole day. Do you have would 15 minutes or 20 minutes, would you say that's enough to get a benefit?
That's definitely a really great number to aim for every day. I talk about that 5 a day rule for eating your vegetables, eat your 5 a day. And I think little rules like that can be really effective for helping people to maintain it as a regular behavior. So if you pick a number that feels manageable for you, like 15 or 20 minutes, and then be able to keep focusing on doing that every day, I think that's great. And there are really simple things people can do, like simple swaps. One of the ones I did is I decided that on my commute, I wasn't going to read the news on my phone anymore. I was going to read a book. And just that simple swap actually meant that I was getting nearly an hour a day of reading in. And I felt so much better compared to reading the news too. And actually with some friends, we recently decided we wouldn't meet up for dinner and drinks anymore. We'd meet up and go to an exhibition or go to a gig or go and do a crafts activity. So those little swaps sound really trivial, but actually can very, very quickly add up to really meaningful amounts of engagements.
Absolutely. Do you have any other sort of swaps that you can think of that might be easy to incorporate?
Well, I talk in the book about in the behavioral science section about being able to make things easy for yourself as well. So there are things like having a book by your bed, having in your alarm clock in the morning, instead of having an alarm, have a piece of music that actually you lie and listen to that whole piece of music, because that can be a really great way of setting your mood up appropriately for the day. If you have crafts or musical instrument or something that you play, make sure it's out and visible, because again, that just really increases the prompt that you're going to do it. And having a routine wherever you can. But across the whole book, what I also do at the end of every chapter is I have something called the daily dose, which is where I talk about specific mental and physical health problems you might be experiencing and give really tailored advice on how you can use the arts for those particular outcomes too.
I love that part of the book. I loved all parts of the book. Can you talk a little bit, maybe give the listener a glimpse into maybe an issue and how you would tailor a particular art form or engagement with the arts for a particular issue?
So actually, one of the really interesting ones that people often ask about is things like chronic pain. If you have pain, how can you use something like the arts to support with that? And music is a really lovely example there. And there's something called the ISO principle, which can be a really great way to manage it, which is whatever pain, and it works really well for stress as well. Whatever pain or stress level you're in, find some music that matches how you're feeling in that moment. So it might be quite intense and with quite fast beats to start off with. And then with each track that you listen to, move it one step down towards where you want to be heading. So calm down that beat, increase that mood, for example, and improve it until you get to a really deep relaxation state. And then from that level, start to just increase it a little bit again. So you get to more of a kind of re-energizing position by the end of it. And something like that might only take you sort of 15 or 20 minutes, but it can be a really lovely, effective way of being able to manage that pain and stress through something as simple as music.
Mm-hmm. It's so powerful. Are there any downsides to incorporating more art?
I think we have to be aware that the arts are not a panacea. They don't always help people's health outcomes. And there are examples where they can even do harm. And I think we have to think really carefully, particularly around things like mental health. I talk in the book about how upsetting and even scary like films and books can actually be really good for us, because they can be a way for our brains to sort of imagine how we would respond to events, to kind of enhance its ability to predict and be able to deal with complex things in our real lives, because we know that it's a story rather than real. But if you're in a really vulnerable position, then actually having lots of exposure to negative emotions like that can be quite challenging. And we see this quite clearly in terms of themes that might be around triggering topics like suicide. And I talk in the book about some examples where this hasn't been handled so well within books or within films, and actually has been quite triggering, and research has demonstrated actually adverse outcomes. But I contrast that with examples where filmmakers, where television companies companies have worked really closely with charities, with people who've lived experience, who've brought very considered viewpoints to it. And they've actually been able to develop amazing material that's actually helped to reduce stigma, to improve understanding, and act in a really supportive way.
I really liked how you had that balance in the book. And so, yes, there are all these benefits, but also we should be cautious about potential, I don't want to use the word harms, but downfalls. And so I really like that part of the book. If there were 3 messages that you would want people to take away from your book, what would they be?
Arts engagement is not a luxury. It is an essential in our lives because arts are a pillar of health, just like physical activity, sleep, diet, nature. And we really have to shift that understanding on that. Second one is that we are not valuing arts and artists enough in our lives. We are actually cutting arts budgets. Often in many countries, we're seeing a lot of closure of arts venues. Working conditions for professional artists can be really challenging. And we really have to, as societies, question why we're doing this and what impact it's having, because all of the health economic research shows that actually it's not only affecting health, but actually affecting health outcomes and health systems as well, health services. But my final thing is that the arts have this incredibly diverse array of benefits for mental and physical health in terms of helping to prevent health conditions even emerging in the first place, acting as incredible tools in health promotion and health communication, and also being able to act as medical treatments in their own right. And I use that word in an informed way. It's not about replacing effective treatments, but it's often about acknowledging that there can be circumstances the arts can actually be more effective without side effects. And there can also be other options when the arts can be added in alongside other medical treatments to be able to provide a more holistic assessment, not just of what's the matter with the patient, but actually what matters to them.
Amazing. I have to ask you, what are you reading these days? Is there do you have a particular book that you're keeping by the bedside, or that that you're taking on your trip to work?
Multiple books all the time. I'm part of a book club, so that really helps in terms of diversity of things. We've actually been reading a whole bunch of golden oldies, so Ruth Rendell mystery novels, which I've been really loving because it's just taken me back sort of 70 years ago to what life was like. I've also, in my book club, we're just reading our first romantasy as a book club, which is not a genre I've ever read before, but I'm really enjoying seeing because it's such a hype now, it's such a sensation, I'm really enjoying seeing it. And actually, I've got very into it. And also with my kids, we're just reading The Famous Five, which is my favorite book when I was a child. So it's been so lovely to rediscover that series again now as an adult.
Such great suggestions. And I think you really highlight, reading in particular, I think has a lot of health benefits. And it doesn't really matter what genre you read. It can be any topic. You just have to like it. You just have to enjoy it. And so I think having, a multitude of books, maybe depending on how you're feeling, I think can really work well.
I love that attitude. I think it's so true. And one of the amazing things about stories is they take us into this imaginary world, and that actually hones the ability of our brains to actually deal with complexity in our real lives. It's called predictive coding. So by letting our brains play in these imaginary worlds through books, it means our brains are more resilient and capable of dealing with different scenarios we can encounter in real life. So that diversity is absolutely key.
Amazing. Can you, and I have to ask, can you maybe tell our readers just how great reading really is and some of the impacts around reading?
Yeah, reading is, I have to say, I've appreciated it even more since working on the science of it. So when we read, we actually experience what's called neural coupling, which means that when we're reading about storylines, our brains imagine that it's us. We actually imagine what it's like to be in those shoes. So the empathy that we can feel for characters, it's real. It actually involves the same regions of the brain that are involved in real life empathy. And the relationships that we build with characters, they can even feel real too. It's known as parasocial interaction. And that can actually help us to feel like we're not alone. Often we find characters where we feel that they are us. us, or they're our new best friend. And that's a really supportive thing for us. It can reduce loneliness. It can help us to feel like we've got more social support, like we're understood. But also by playing out different scenarios through stories, it allows us to imagine how we can respond to those events. It hones our creative thinking, so our ability to problem solve creatively in the real world. It helps us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, which is known as theory of mind, which means that we can then imagine how they might feel, and that can enhance our social interactions with people in the real world too. And also stories can be that escapism. By giving us those emotions, they can help us with our own emotional responses, they can relax us, they can distract us from whatever stresses we might be having in our own lives.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more.
I could carry on and on. There are so many.
I love it. I'm conscious of time. And so I think I'll give you your final thoughts on the arts and well-being and health.
I believe the arts are completely fundamental to health and well-being. We actually see that people who engage in the arts have higher levels of well-being, happiness, life satisfaction. And this is also why it's so important that we invest in them in societies. We did recent modelling in the UK and we said, well, people say that they have higher well-being, but what's the health economic benefit of this? And we know that people with higher well-being, they actually have enhanced productivity at work. They're less likely to use health and social care services. They're able to support volunteering, caring. They can be more active citizens. And we actually found that the economic value of arts engagement for well-being alone, just amongst working age adults in the UK, is £18.6 billion per year. So I think this is absolutely critical to be celebrating how many benefits the arts bring to us as individuals and to us as societies. And really, I can't understand why we're not investing so much more in them, given just how valuable they are.
Mm-hmm. I think every policymaker should read your book. I think everyone should read your book because I couldn't agree with you more. And for very little investment, we would get so much more, out of it. And so I'm a big fan of your work. And again, I think there's an art activity for everyone out there. It's just a matter of finding it if you haven't found it. It's such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much. The book is Art Cure, The Science of How the Arts Save Lives by Dr. Daisy Fancourt. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Happy creating.
Thank you.